Weeks passed and something strange started happening. I began to enjoy being Mrs. Chuka Obi. At first, I told myself it was just the perks, the luxury, the respect, the way people looked at me differently now. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the way Chuka watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he defended me without hesitation, the way he made me feel important. One evening, after yet another high-profile dinner, we arrived home. I kicked off my heels, exhausted. Tired? Chuka asked, loosening his tie. Completely, I sighed, sinking into the couch. He sat beside me, watching me closely. You handled yourself well tonight. I've had a lot of practice pretending, I said with a small smile. He smirked. Are you still pretending? My breath hitched. I opened my mouth to say yes, to remind him that this was just a deal, but the words wouldn't come out. Because the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. Later that night, I found myself standing on the balcony, staring at the city lights. I didn't hear Chuka approach until he spoke. You're thinking too much. I can't help it, I admitted. Whatever this is, it's confusing. He was silent for a moment, then said, it wasn't supposed to be. I know. I turned to face him, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. This wasn't just a business deal to him anymore, either. Why did you choose me, Chuka? I asked softly. You could have picked any woman in Lagos. He hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair. Because you were different. Because I knew you understood what it meant to fight for something. And because, he exhaled, because I wanted you. My heart pounded. You wanted me? His eyes held mine. Yes. Something shifted in that moment. The lines we had drawn between us were no longer clear. And as he reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear, I knew this was no longer just a marriage of convenience. It was becoming real. From that night on, everything changed. Chuka and I still played our roles in public, holding hands, smiling for the cameras, attending events as the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, the act was no longer just an act. I caught myself watching him when he wasn't looking, wondering what he was thinking, feeling something I had no business feeling. And the worst part, I knew he felt it too. But neither of us was willing to admit it. One afternoon, I decided to distract myself by visiting my parents. Maybe a dose of their usual disapproval would remind me why I was here in the first place. I walked into the house to find my mother and Chioma drinking tea in the living room. Their conversation stopped the moment they saw me. Well, look who finally remembered her family, Chioma sneered. I've been busy, I replied, sitting down. My mother frowned. Too busy to check on us, but not too busy to play pretend with your so-called husband? I stiffened. What are you talking about? Chioma smirked. Come on, Susan. Do you really think Chuka married you out of love? Everyone knows he needed a wife for business reasons. The question is, do you know it? I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. What's your point, Chioma? She leaned in, her eyes gleaming. My point is, you're nothing more than a contract wife. And when the time is up, you'll be nothing again. Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I stood up, keeping my face emotionless. Enjoy your tea, Chioma. Then I walked out, determined to prove her wrong. That night, Chuka noticed I was quieter than usual. Something on your mind? He asked as we sat in the living room. I hesitated, then sighed. Chioma said something today. She called me a contract wife. His jaw tightened. She's just trying to get under your skin. Is she wrong? I challenged, meeting his gaze. This marriage was a deal, wasn't it? He was silent for a moment, then leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. It was a deal, Susan, but tell me, does it still feel like one? I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I couldn't sleep that night. Chuka's words kept playing in my head. Does it still feel like a deal? It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't simple at all, because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about business anymore. This wasn't just about revenge. I had fallen for my husband. But did he feel the same way? Or was I just fooling myself? The next evening, we attended another business event. It was supposed to be just another night of smiling for the cameras, pretending to be the perfect couple. But then she arrived, Nkem. She was tall, beautiful, and confident, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in Chuka's world. And from the way she smiled at him, I knew they had history. "Chuka," she purred, touching his arm. "It's been a while." I stood beside him, suddenly feeling invisible. "Nkem," Chuka greeted, his tone polite but distant. "I see you're back in town." "I had to come see what all the fuss was about," she said, turning her sharp gaze to me. "So this is the famous wife." I forced a smile. "Susan," I introduced myself. "Oh, I know who you are," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I just didn't think you were his type." The insult was subtle, but I felt it, and I hated that it got to me. Chuka's hand slid around my waist. She's exactly my type. My heart skipped a beat, but I reminded myself, this was for show, right? Still, the way Nkem's smile tightened told me one thing. She wasn't happy, and she wasn't done. That night, as we drove home, I stared out the window, my emotions a tangled mess. "You've been quiet," Chuka said. "Just tired," I lied. He didn't push, but I could feel his eyes on me. The truth was, I wasn't just tired. I was scared. Scared that I was falling for a man who might never truly be mine. Scared that I was playing a game I didn't know how to win. And most of all, scared that when the time came, I'd be the one left heartbroken. Days passed, but something had changed between Chuka and me. I tried to act like everything was normal, like I wasn't bothered by Nkem's sudden presence in his life. But every time I saw them talking, laughing, sharing memories that I wasn't a part of, a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Jealousy. I hated it. I hated that I cared. I hated that I wanted more from Chuka, more than this arrangement, more than just being his convenient wife. I wanted him to choose me. But did he? One evening, I found myself alone in the house. Chuka had gone out for a meeting, or at least, that's what he told me. But when I scrolled through my phone, I saw a picture online that made my heart drop. Chuka and Nkem at a high-end restaurant, smiling, seated too close. My vision blurred with anger. I threw my phone on the couch and paced the living room. Was I stupid for thinking he might actually feel something for me? Hours later, he finally came home. "You're back late," I said, crossing my arms. He glanced at me, then at my phone, where the picture was still on the screen. He sighed. "Susan, it's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I snapped. "Because it looks like you had a wonderful evening with your ex while your wife sat at home like a fool." His jaw clenched. "It was just business." "Business?" I scoffed. "She looked like she was ready to jump into your arms." He exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "Why are you so upset?" I froze. I could have given 100 excuses. I could have reminded him that Chioma was watching, waiting for me to fail. But instead, I blurted out the truth. "Because I love you, Chuka." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Chuka's expression changed, shock, then something deeper, something unreadable. "Susan." He reached for me, but I stepped back, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "Forget it," I whispered, turning away. I shouldn't have said anything. I rushed to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded, my emotions a mess. I had finally admitted it, but had I just made the biggest mistake of my life? I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again. I had told Chuka I loved him, and he had said nothing. The next morning, I avoided him. I didn't want to see the pity in his eyes, didn't want to hear him tell me that this was just a contract and nothing more. But Chuka had other plans. As I walked down the stairs, ready to leave the house and clear my head, I found him waiting in the living room. "We need to talk," he said firmly. I shook my head. "No, we don't." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Yes, we do." I swallowed hard, bracing myself for rejection. But then, to my surprise, he let out a small chuckle. You really think I don't feel the same way? I blinked. What? Susan, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I love you. I think I've loved you for a while now, but I was too stubborn to admit it. My breath hitched. You love me? He smiled. Yes, and I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore. I want a real marriage. I want us. Tears burned my eyes, but this time they were happy tears. Are you sure? I whispered. He cupped my face, his thumb brushing against my cheek. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like our previous kisses. Those had been for show, for the cameras, for the world to believe our lie. This kiss was real, passionate, filled with every emotion we had both been too afraid to admit. When we finally pulled apart, I smiled up at him. So, does this mean we don't need the contract anymore? He laughed, pulling me into his arms. The only contract I care about now is the one where I promise to love you for the rest of my life. And just like that, what had started as a game of revenge had turned into something beautiful. A real marriage, a real love, and this time, it was forever. The end. Dear amazing subscribers, thank you for your continuous love and support. Your engagement, comments, and encouragement mean the world to me. You are the heart of this channel, and I truly appreciate every single one of you. If you're new here, welcome to Africa Folktales by Jane. If you love compelling stories filled with drama, romance, and twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let's keep this journey going together. Subscribe now and be part of the story.